Did you know that you can grow a fruit tree to be any size? From bonsai to giant 30-foot trees, it all depends on how you prune it, and there are two different types. Josh here, I've been growing fruit trees in the ground for 10 years, and I've got hundreds planted. And behind me, I've got this Asian persimmon, and this one I'm letting be a small tree form, and it's really doing well. It's got a couple low branches that I'm letting go, right? If I wanted this to be a little bit taller, I could lop off some of these branches and continue to train this up, but I want to let this be sort of a smaller tree. Now, another example that we're going to look at here is a fig tree, and this is my Alma fig. This one I'm letting be a bush, and figs do really well as a bush tree. And let me give you a little bit of insight as to why. So figs sometimes will die all the way back to the ground, and they're more likely to sprout back up from those roots if you let them grow in a bush form. And why is that? Because a lot of times that dieback may only occur in this upper region. So if you've got more lower branches closer to the ground, you're actually more likely to get regrowth. So if you're in a colder climate and you're growing figs, I recommend a bush form versus a tree. If you did want to grow a tree form, all you would need to do is get in here and you can snip off some of these lower branches and those coming up from the ground. Then you would just have a single trunk and an upper crown. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Let's go look at some other trees. And while we do that, let's talk a little bit about tree versus bush. So like I said, you can grow a fruit tree to be any size, and it really depends on what you're going for. So this particular tree behind me here is my Ayers pear, and it's a great southern sweet variety, European, and I'm letting it get really big. And the reason is because I wanted to shade my shed. And so I'm actually going to let this get to be 20 feet tall probably, but there's a purpose behind it. Now, other fruit trees, I like to keep to about 8 foot in height. And the reason for that is you really don't want fruit trees to get so tall that you can't reach any of the fruit. So I've got this Asian pear, and this one is probably about 8 feet tall. It's doing really good, really healthy, probably about 5 years old at this point. Just had a lot of fruit this year from it. Another one is this apple tree here. And you can see that this apple tree has a bunch of apples, and these are all easily within reach. So you want to make sure that you prune the tree to the size where you can reach the fruit. Now, apple trees, pears, peaches, plums, they generally don't do as well in bush form because they're grown on rootstock. And that rootstock sometimes will create sprouts from the rootstock of a different variety. So if you do prune them down really short, just make sure that it's coming out of that scion wood and not the rootstock itself. All right, behind me, we've got two beautiful pineapple guavas. Now these I've let become bush size, but they're still pretty large. I mean, these are 8 foot tall bushes, and this is about the maximum size that these are going to get in terms of their growth. And so really beautiful evergreen tree, and you can see they've got tons of little fruit forming on them. Beautiful tree, great landscaping tree, but you can actually keep these down more as a landscape bush, probably about 3 feet tall. So I've got those in the front of my property and really around my house itself, and you can just cut them down every year. But this is what they look like when they're not cut down. So again, you can train a tree to the size that you want it through pruning and training. And I usually do most of my pruning in the summer for height. And the reason for that is because it produces less growth in the fall, sort of slows it down, right? If you prune in the winter, what happens is you're actually creating a lot more vigorous growth come spring. So I do a lot of my summer pruning for height and then thinning in the winter. All right, here's another example of a little fig tree behind me. This one's grown into a bush form, so it's doing pretty well. Not as full just because of where I've got it, but you can see it's got growth coming out of the ground there. And then we've also got 3 more examples we're going to look at today. So this is a red mulberry, sort of a Native American mulberry, and it can get really big. And so every year I have to head this one back, but you can see it's still pretty tall. All right, next up, we've got my Asian mulberry, which is getting towards the end here, starting to drop some leaves. It's getting to be fall. This one I'm keeping a little bit shorter, and I've got a dwarf mulberry. So the dwarf mulberry, I'm actually going to grow in bush form, and you can see what this looks like here. So this is my dwarf mulberry, and it's got multiple shoots coming out from the base. And I'm just going to continue to head this right about here. And I actually did this not long ago, so you got some new growth coming up. The bottom line is, if you want to train a fruit tree to a bush, you probably can do it. If you want to train it to let it become a giant tree, you can do it. So you just need to think about what works for your area, specifically where you're growing, and what you want to achieve with that fruit tree. That's what I always go for. So I've got some pawpaws back here, a lot of different things. Fruiting bushes. This is a Ariona chokeberry. These are really great. They generally stop at about this height. They're naturally bushing. So some trees will be more of a bush form naturally. You can see that it grows up from the ground there. I could train this into a tree, but it probably wouldn't do as well. So again, it goes back to varieties, but it also goes back to what you're trying to achieve. All right, if you've got any questions about growing your own fruit trees, post them in the comments below. We're doing this 20-day challenge, and this is the last one we'll probably look at here. This is 2 different hazelnut trees, and if you get down, you can actually see that these are forming a bush on both. And I actually planted these as a double planting because they're going to cross-pollinate each other, and I'm going to let them be one giant bush form. So train your trees to the size that you want. Let them be either bush or tree based on what you're trying to achieve. All right, I'll see you in the next training.